So let me sum this all up and make a final observation. I want to put this passage in the context of the book of Ephesians from which it is drawn, because I want us all to get the big picture here. Christians sometimes have a tendency to look at one verse or a couple of verses and agree with them, but sometimes fail to remember that they must be kept within the context of the passage or sometimes the entire book in which they were written. This short passage needs to be considered within the context of the whole book. You see, most people agree the main subject of the book of Ephesians is about our call to the Lord and our calling to be part of the body of Christ. We answer that call when we trust Jesus Christ. Some of the greatest salvation verses in all of the Bible are found in this book. For example, Ephesians 2 verse 8 says, "For by grace are you saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is a gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast." And chapter 2 then goes on to say that call makes us part of belonging with the other people who've trusted Christ, an organism that is called the body of Christ, which we today of course call the church. Then in the beginning of chapter 4 he writes that because of that relationship we should always walk in ways that demonstrate that truth. Beginning in chapter 4, he laid out all the ways we should walk, which is just a metaphor for the ways we should live our lives. He talks about walking in unity with other believers in a way that's worthy of our calling. He talks about walking in love, about walking in light, about walking in wisdom and walking in righteousness. If you've been tracking with me through this book over these last podcasts, you'll hear me explain each one of these categories. We now come to this passage, and it says, based on the overall context of the book, behaving this way is just another practical way of walking in wisdom. That was the last thing he said before he plunged into this discussion on how people should behave. He talked about walking in wisdom, and then he launches off and he talks about how we should relate to each other. He talked about husbands and wives, parents and children, and now masters and servants, those in authority and those under authority. And as I think there's a sense in which all of this teaching comes under the category of what it takes to walk in wisdom. So why is living and working this way a wise thing to do? I believe if you apply these principles in your work life, you probably, at the very least, won't get fired, because you'll be a valuable employee, and you may and most likely will flourish in your employment. You might even get a promotion or a pay rise. But the main benefit of living this way is the fact that you will be rewarded at the judgment seat of Christ, and that needs to be your focus. Now perhaps you're struggling at work. Perhaps there's a tension and a frustration, even a dissatisfaction in your work life. But maybe it's there because you're working for mammon and you're not working and doing your job for the Lord. If you're thinking that way, then you're expecting to get something from work or from your human boss that they can't really give you, and it's never going to make you happy. Simply put, when you go to work, whether you are over somebody in authority or under somebody, do what you do as unto the Lord. Don't just look at the frustrations of your work. Look beyond the situations and do what you do and consider the eternal. Do it as if you're doing it for the Lord, knowing that if you don't feel you're getting rewarded in this life, you will still be rewarded and promoted later. Promoted to glory, in fact. There is a story about a missionary and his wife who returned after years and years of sacrificial service in Africa on the same ship that President Theodore Roosevelt also returned to the United States after he'd been game hunting in Africa. When the ship docked in New York, great crowds greeted the president, and the press were there to cover the story. The old missionary and his wife walked off the ship unnoticed, and they made their way to a cheap hotel to spend the night there before travelling west. Turning to his wife, the missionary said, "It just doesn't seem right that we gave our lives in Africa for Christ, relieving suffering, bringing hope to many. But now we've arrived back here, and there's no one to meet us and say well done. The President shoots animals and returns to an almost royal welcome. We serve God, and we serve our fellow human beings, and we have got nothing. As they prayed together, they said, later it seemed to them as though the Lord said to them, do you know why you haven't received your reward on earth yet? Because you're not really home yet. So take that attitude to work tomorrow, in the knowledge that you may get some reward in this life, but the big reward, the main reward, will be when God calls you home to be with Him, and the Lord will say, well done, good and faithful servant.